Hi everyone! Today we will talk about cause-effect writing, which is your third and final pattern of development that you'll be practicing in this class. So cause-effect essays examine causes and or effects of a certain event or topic. And this is a really important way of thinking to be familiar with and to practice every day, just in life in general, or for any field of study that you're in. So think about these questions. For instance, why are poverty and homelessness increasing in the US? That question is going to ask you about causes. How has the Respect for Marriage Act of 2022 affected couples and families? So that's going to look at effects. Or what led to the Industrial Revolution and how did it influence society over the next decade? That sounds like a test question you might get in a history class, for instance, and this is going to deal with causes and effects. So just knowing how to address these important issues and knowing that causes and effects have to do with the answers to these questions will just make you more aware of the world around you and these connections that are always intermingling to produce things that affect you and people you care about every day. Sometimes different causes can lead to the same effect. So if we think about the subject of immigration, it has many different causes. Political repression in one's home country, the desire to further their education, the desire to join family members who have moved, economic opportunities, even religious freedom. And the effect of those things drives someone to leave their home country for a new start somewhere else. Likewise, a single cause can produce many different effects. So back to immigration, the cause, people immigrate to the US, okay, and then what are the effects of that? Well, a more diverse culture, increased competition for certain jobs, challenges to our education system, changing political agendas, and unfortunately increased racism. It's just a byproduct of different kinds of people moving around you. Some people are going to respond to that with bigotry, unfortunately. And these causes and effects, it's fine to generalize if we're talking about immigration as a whole, but if we're thinking about why someone comes to the US, that is going to be different for each individual case. So the causes are not as simple as, okay, here's why people immigrate to the US and this is the same for everybody. That's not necessarily true. Not everyone who comes here experiences all of those causes pushing them to do so. Let's look at 4 types of causes that you'll be exploring. We have main cause and contributory cause. So a main cause is the most important cause of an effect. A contributory cause is more of a contributing factor. Like it has some involvement, but it's not the most significant reason why something happens. And that's either or. You can have a main cause or a contributory cause, but one cause is not going to be both of those things. Same thing for immediate cause and remote cause. The immediate cause of something is going to happen right before it. It closely precedes the effect, and so it's easy to recognize. A remote cause is less obvious because it's further away in time. The effect of that cause happens further and further down the line. So it's a little bit harder to recognize that event as a cause, even though a remote cause can also be a main cause. So let's look at some examples to make this more clear. I'm going to tell you about something called the Hartford roof collapse. During the winter of 1978, an unusually large amount of snow accumulated or piled up on the roof of the Civic Center in Hartford, Connecticut. And the roof fell in. That's not good. Newspapers reported that the weight of the snow had caused the collapse, and they were partly right. But other buildings in the area had not been flattened by the snow, so why this building? The main cause seemed to lie elsewhere. And insurance investigators, as they do, eventually determined that the roof design, not the weight of the snow, was the primary culprit of the roof collapse. In other words, other buildings that had stronger design roofs, those buildings did not collapse. But this one did, because the roof was poorly made. So the poor design of the roof was both a main cause and a remote cause, because it was constructed years and years prior to this event. The large amount of snow was the immediate cause, because it fell in right after the snow piled up, but it was also a contributory cause. It certainly had something to do with the roof falling in, but the main cause they determined was the roof design. The Hartford roof collapse incident shows us that things are not always as they appear when it comes to determining causality or the relationship between causes and effects. Sometimes we have to look a little deeper than what is going on the surface to see what exactly is causing certain effects. Now, it's not always easy to distinguish a main cause from a contributory cause. This is often opinionated. Sometimes you just can't determine it, especially if we're thinking about broad topics such as procrastination or binge drinking. When I first started teaching, I would assigned cause-effect essays, and I let students choose, for instance, what are the causes of procrastination? And when it came time to write the essay, it was difficult because students couldn't necessarily identify a main cause or a contributory cause, because it differs case by case. It's so individualized. It's not always going to be easy to say that getting distracted is the main cause of procrastination. That's not always true. So think about gun violence, for instance, mass shootings. Fierce debates occur every day about what causes them, and I'm sure you've heard them. Many blame guns as the main cause, and others say, no, you can't blame the gun. You have to blame the person holding the gun, and so it's a mental health issue. Who's right? Likewise with something like obesity, the main cause might seem straightforward. You might say, oh, well, that's easy. It's consuming more calories than you burn over time, right? But for one person, other factors might be just as important, like the high cost of healthy food, the time and availability and energy it takes to prepare that food, or health conditions that induce weight gain. I've heard of plenty of conditions that mean someone who eats relatively healthy is going to gain a ton of weight just because something affecting their body. And so the main cause isn't always as obvious as you might be thinking. So that's something to keep in mind as you decide your topic for the paper. Let's look at some types of effects now. We have immediate effect, and this again is going to occur directly after its cause. Remote effects occur further away in time, so later after the cause. And then we have what's called a causal chain, and I've grouped this under types of effects because a causal chain, I never say this word correctly, or maybe I do 50% of the time. Causal chain. It's a series of events, so it does involve effects in which A causes B. So B is an effect, but B is also a cause because B causes C, C causes D, and so on and so forth. on to infinity. So causal chains look at how one event can keep causing multiple things down the line. Sometimes we call these domino effects, ripple effects, or as you saw in A Sound of Thunder, the butterfly effect. Although that term was actually coined later, and it's a little different than what we think of it in Bradbury's story, but I'm not going to get into all that today, at least. But it's a domino. It's a series of events because you knock one domino over and the rest of them follow. So it considers how one thing can lead to so many others. Let's look at another example. The Indian water pump. When a solar-powered water pump was provided for a well in India, the village headman took it over and sold the water until he was stopped. The new liquid abundance attracted hordes of unwanted nomads. Village boys who had drawn water in buckets had nothing to do now, and some became criminals. The gap between rich and poor widened, since the poor had no land to benefit from this new irrigation system. The rich got richer, the poor, well, you know the saying. Finally, village women broke the pump so they could gather again around the well that had been the center of their social lives. So in other words, these women liked the well. That's where they gathered and hung out, and this pump not only took the place of some of their labor, but it was probably so, I'm assuming, big and involved some infrastructure that they didn't like, and so they couldn't hang out around it anymore, so they didn't like this pump. And what do we learn from this incident? Well, we have the immediate effect of more travelers in the village. That's what they mean by nomads. So this water pump is installed, and all of a sudden, people flock there because they want the water. Then we have some remote effects, or things that happen a little further down the line. Increased wealth inequality, women breaking the pump, okay, because it gets in the way of their socializing. And we have a causal chain. The pump is installed, which means the boys who used to carry water now need to make money. And so because of that, they turn to crime. That's an example of a causal chain. And these events show us that technological advances have social, cultural, and economic consequences that are often unanticipated. Unforeseen consequences can happen. And before we go any further, we need to talk about the spelling of these words, because I know some of you are going to mess them up. Effect is the noun, affect is the verb. And how do we remember that? A equals action. Affect starts with an A, so action is the verb. And it's causal, not casual. Some of you are going to want to spell it casual, and even if you spell it correctly, Microsoft Word might underline it and say, no, this is wrong, or it might auto-correct it to casual. But causal is a word, so I don't think it really does that anymore. I know it used to. Notice that it follows the same order, AU, as in the word cause. Okay, not casual. We're not talking about casual chains. We're talking about causal chains. So the medicine had a calming effect on the patient. There's the noun. The weather can affect your mood. There's affect. That's a verb. Wearing casual pants to a formal event can begin a causal chain of embarrassment. Right? You don't want to mix these up. Let's do a quick quiz. Test your knowledge. Lack of sleep can blank. Is it effect or affect how well you think? It is affect. Can affect. It's a verb. Can affect how well you think. One effect or affect of studying every day is better grades. That is effect. The new law had a big effect or affect on local businesses. That is effect. Her criticism didn't effect or affect his confidence. That is affect. The verb. The longest effect or affect of the storm was widespread power outages. That is a noun. Effect. And finally, the loud noise affected or affected the baby, causing her to cry. That would be affected. Affected the baby, causing her to cry. It did something to the baby. It affected her. It was an action. It is a verb. Now, cause-effect writing must take special care to avoid 3 logical fallacies. What is a logical fallacy? It is a flaw in how you think. It is a flaw in reasoning. And there's 3 we're going to talk about. Slippery slope, post hoc ergo propter hoc, and mistaking correlation with causation. Slippery slope. Believing that one action will trigger a chain reaction of events leading to an extreme and undesirable outcome. Why is this a fallacy? Because there is insufficient evidence for each step in this chain. In other words, it's assuming that one thing will inevitably lead to this catastrophic result without having evidence that it's going to do so. For instance, when same-sex marriage was legalized, before that and even now, people were arguing that legalizing same-sex marriage, if we do that, then what's going to stop us from legalizing marrying animals or inanimate objects? Fun fact, in some places, marrying inanimate objects is legal. There is a woman married to the Eiffel Tower, for instance. Anyway, there's no evidence that legalizing same-sex marriage is going to snowball into these other things. It's a slippery slope fallacy to claim that. Or if we said, if the government bans assault rifles, what's going to stop it from banning all tools for self-defense if we set this precedent? Well, that might sound like a convincing argument, but there's really no evidence to say just based on this one action that all of these other actions are going to happen. Or not letting your wife adopt one dog because you claim that she's then going to adopt 10 dogs until your house is filled with dogs. That is a completely non-personal example. It's really not. I can adopt as many dogs as I want, but that would be a slippery slope. Saying, no, you can't adopt this dog because then what's stopping you from adopting another dog and another one and another one, and my house is going to be filled with dogs. That is a slippery slope argument. And assuming that one effect is going to then cause all of these other things, again, without evidence, that's how you make this slippery slope argument. It assumes that the unfavorable extreme result is inevitable when it doesn't have to be. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Don't try to pronounce that until you've practiced it in your head a few times. It's Latin. It means after this, therefore because of this. And it assumes that because one event happens before another event, that the first event must have caused the second one. And you can make some really absurd arguments here. For example, we know that roosters crow right before the sun rises. Then a rooster's crow must be what causes the sun to rise, right? Or you cross the street and then you get a headache, so you assume that crossing the street causes your headaches. Or a boy is diagnosed with autism after receiving vaccines, so the vaccines must be what caused the autism, right? I mean, we know that that line of argument is fallacious or doesn't hold water. There are some flaws in arguing just on the basis of something happening before the other thing that there's causality there, right? These arguments link two events based on the timing alone rather than factual evidence that one is causing the other. And we can get even more crazy looking at the third one, correlation and causation. Assuming that because two events are related, and sometimes it's two events occurring simultaneously at the same time, that one is causing the other. Here's some examples. Ice cream sales and shark attacks increased during the summer. So one has to be causing the other. We should therefore ban ice cream to save lives, because obviously the ice cream sales are attracting sharks and there's some causality there. Or saying global warming has increased around the same rate that pirate activity has decreased. Therefore, global warming has obviously killed off the pirates. Or your history teacher sneezes every time he talks about the Watergate scandal. I realize the word about is missing in this slide. My apologies. Therefore, he's allergic to the subject of Watergate, or one is causing the other. Watergate is causing him to sneeze. This is absurd, but it's the line of thinking that mistakes correlation with causation. Now, temporal relationships, whether it's two events occurring at the same time or one event occurring before the other, these are sometimes just coincidence, but they can be good places to start when investigating causality. Sometimes there is a third cause lurking in the background that explains this correlation. Look at ice cream and sharks, for instance. What do these events have in common? Well, the warm weather is bringing more people to the beach and influences higher sales of ice cream. So both can be explained by hot temperatures. They happen because it's warmer out. Also, children get the MMR vaccine at 12 months, and at 12 months, that age is when several characteristics of autism begin to appear. So they both can be explained by the age of the child, which is what determines the vaccine schedule. It's not that one causes the other. It's not that the vaccine causes autism. It's just the timing can both be explained by the child's age. There is a hilarious website called Spurious Correlations, and what the maker of this website has done is he's looked at graphs that are very similar for things that have nothing to do with each other, and he groups them together to make these really funny correlations. So Google searches for small and how it correlates with customer satisfaction with American Airlines, and look throughout the years. I mean, it's so similar. So obviously these have to be correlated somehow, right? Just based on this graph. No, obviously no. Associate's degrees awarded in business and management, and the popularity of the Scumbag Steve meme. Okay, obviously nothing to do with each other, but looking at the graph, you might, why do I keep saying graphed? Graph. You may think that they're correlated. Mike Madonna's regular season NFL goal assists and customer satisfaction with CVS. Now this is suspicious though. Look at the graph. Look how similar it is. That cracks me up. I'll link this website in Canvas so you can browse it for yourself. We gotta have some memes in here, right? Subject is perfect for memes. You see, they're looking at a Venn diagram. People have made very funny I can't talk today. Very funny Venn diagrams is what I am the words I'm trying to form right now. The Venn diagram, everybody who has gone to the moon has eaten chicken. So obviously chicken makes you go to the moon. Or this is my favorite correlation and causation meme. Because just looking at it, the seagull would have to weigh 1 million pounds. When you're outside, many bad things can happen, but when you stay inside and drink coffee, you're safer. So drinking coffee makes you live longer. I mean, they might not be wrong about that. Correlation versus causality. That dude's trying to help, you know. He thinks he's helping. Every single person who confuses correlation and causation ends up dying. So don't be one of those people. All right, now let's look at some examples of cause effect in some popular media you might be familiar with. You might not be. And so I apologize in advance for that. But I'm going to start with The Day After Tomorrow, this terrifying film that for some reason remains popular today. It was in 2004, and I saw this movie in theaters. Oh God, I feel so old, but I did, and I was really looking forward to it. I love disaster movies, and this is just it's so good. The plot involves this causal chain, and the main character tries to explain this to, well, first to a group of scientists like himself, and then to Congress. And anyway, this is what he tries explaining. The planet's getting warmer, right? Which causes the ice to melt, which means ocean temperatures are going to cool from this melted ice water. And that stalls the North Atlantic Current, which goes up the eastern United States, and what it does is it brings warm weather north from the equator. But when it stalls, this warm weather doesn't reach the northern hemisphere anymore, and this is where the chain kind of falls apart, because after this, 3 gigantic cyclones form and they unleash a new ice age on the Earth. And that is what happens. So it shows us what a causal chain looks like, and how global warming can actually produce an ice age. And that seems contraindicated, but it's what happens in this movie. There's also the movie Contagion, which I cannot actually believe was back in 2011. It's a lesser known movie. It's another disaster flick. But it's really good. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty entertaining. It is based on potential effects of industrial factory farming, or how we farm enough animals to feed the population. And it actually doesn't show a lot of factory farming, but I read a lot about this movie when it first came out, and the creators interviewed pandemic scientists and food scientists to understand how factory farming today could potentially lead to the next pandemic. So it's actually a well-researched movie that's based in fact. And so throughout the movie, where people are just dying in droves because this is such a strong virus that kills almost everyone who gets it, the researchers are trying to figure out what caused it, and they discovered traces of bat and pig DNA in the virus, right? That's one of the things they discover. And throughout the film, it shows like patient 2, patient 10, patient 5,000, and it doesn't ever show patient 0, at least not those words, until you get to the very end. The end of the movie is a flashback showing how the bat and the pig make contact. I believe the bat drops something out of its mouth and the pig eats it, if I'm remembering correctly. So that is how the virus was formed. And then it shows the cook or the chef at this restaurant who had just dealt with the pig carcass. He shakes hands with patient zero, who's played by Gwyneth Paltrow. And so it shows how this virus was created based on unsanitary handling of meat from a bat and a pig coming together. So I thought that ending is really interesting. It's sort of a reverse causal chain. And of course, a movie about a contagion, cause effect is so important to that. Part of the movie also goes into the virus's R naught, or this number that shows how many people are going to be infected based on who comes into contact with the virus. And the R naught, the higher it is, the more people are going to be infected and possibly die. And so it does involve this extreme chain of events, cause effect relationship. And now I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about one of my favorite shows ever, Grey's Anatomy. I haven't watched it in like 2 seasons because I don't know. It's really not as good as it used to be. But season 6 was close to peaking as far as how good the show got. So first, if you're not familiar with the show, you've never seen it, you can fast forward if you want. I'm not going to know. I'm not going to care. But I am going to explain this. I will explain it so that even if you haven't seen it, you should get something out of this explanation as far as how it relates to cause effect. So let me just pose this question to you. How can the collapse of a woman in a grocery store cause the titular character, its title character, to suffer a miscarriage? Well, let's find out. So there's a woman named Allison, and she collapses in a grocery store. She's taken to the hospital, and doctors then discover she has internal bleeding because she has a tumor, and they know about the tumor. They know about her cancer, but it's bleeding, and so they have to schedule her for surgery. She has a stroke during the surgery, and unfortunately, doctors determined that she's not going to wake up. And they, based on her DNR, which she's not DNR, it's something she signed that she doesn't want to be on life support. She wants to be taken off if this were to happen. She's already stated her wishes that she would want to be removed from life support. So she dies, and her husband, who is in mourning and obviously suffering some mental health problems as well, he blames the surgical team. So he comes back to the hospital weeks after this, intending to kill all of the doctors who were on his wife's case. And in the finale, it shows Gary Clark. He's searching for Derek Shepherd while the hospital is on lockdown. It's very suspenseful, very stressful. He eventually finds Derek on the catwalk, and he points his gun at him. And Gary's issue, is that Derek was on his wife's case, and he says like, oh, everybody looks up to you like you're some kind of god, and you're not. But the name Dr. Shepherd, like, that triggers him somehow. No pun intended, but he has a problem with Derek calling himself a doctor and acting like a god and whatever. Derek tries to de-escalate the situation. He speaks to him calmly. He reminds Gary that he is a flawed human being. He insists that his wife wouldn't want him to become a killer. Like, he's throwing all of these reasons at him, trying to calm him down. And it works because Gary, the shooter, he's lowering his gun. But right then, a surgical resident named April walks into the catwalk. And she says something like, oh, Dr. Shepherd, I'm glad you're okay. I don't really remember. But she does call him Dr. Shepherd, and this causes a distraction. And then Gary shoots Derek. And then later on, during Derek's emergency surgery, Meredith, who is his wife, has a miscarriage from the stress of the day. She's in surgery, and I won't get into it. It's a very stressful surgery for some reason, and she has a miscarriage. So, this incident, this episode, shows us how complicated the causes of a single event can be. Allison's internal bleeding, what causes her to collapse in the store, is a remote contributory cause of Meredith's miscarriage. But the more interesting thing is April walking in, because April walking in is the immediate cause for Derek getting shot. But given that Gary had lowered his weapon, is her appearance a main or contributory cause? That's debatable. The debate continues to this day. There are forums online where people still debate this, and actually April is a very hated character, I think partially for this reason. She's not a very popular character on the show. She's gotten a little better, but anyway. It's debatable. This is one of those scenarios where some people think it's a main cause because if she hadn't walked in, maybe he wouldn't have gotten shot. Or is it just contributory? Can we really not blame her for it? I don't know. But it's a very complicated situation. And we have to mention A Sound of Thunder, right? The story you read. How can stepping on a butterfly change the outcome of a presidential election 60,000,055 years later? It seems impossible. That seems absurd. But in the story, it's not. Which is what makes the ending so eerie. That it actually is possible. And that is what happened. And Eccles is so distraught by what he's done that he lets Travis kill him. At least that's my interpretation. The whole story in Travis's theory, it consists of an enormous causal chain that actually sounds so ridiculous when you think about it. But he's put so much thought into this that it's so specific and almost sounds convincing. Especially when we get to the end of this causal chain. That's what in rereading it is so disarming when he starts talking about Washington might never cross the Delaware. There might never be a United States at all. And so that's a little bit of foreshadowing for us, because the future of the United States is very much affected by the simple action of stepping on a butterfly. Causal chain, right there, right there. Now for Essay 3, you've got your rubric, you've got instructions, the sample essay, and the topic list. All of that is in Canvas for you. You are required to use causal terminology when relevant. So when you are discussing causes, you better tell me, is that a main or a contributory? And if you can't really tell, then mention that. Say, it's a little bit difficult to determine whether this is a main or contributory cause, and say why. I want you to use these terms to really strengthen your analysis of whatever topic you choose. Now, choosing a topic that is too broad, and this is true as with any other writing assignment, will pose difficulties. I mentioned this earlier. When it comes to using the terms, which is one reason I've put the narrative option in there. And once you look at that, that will make sense. So don't write about procrastination in general, but if you want to write about one time that you procrastinated on a specific assignment and what caused that, and maybe the effects of that, that would be fine, because you know what was the main cause of that. You know what the effects were. And so you could be really specific in talking about that. Many of these topics are going to require research unless you are already freakishly familiar with the subject matter, which some of you might be, and don't feel like you're a freak about that. That's actually pretty impressive if you have a lot of background knowledge on some of these topics. But remember, if you do use research, you have to follow MLA rules. And the topics are organized by whether the essay would deal mostly with causes, mostly with effects, or both. However, I do think any cause-effect essay is going to involve both at some point. It's just, is it mostly going to be about causes, or is it mostly going to be about effects? That's just how I've organized them. And I put some fun options in there, some that are creative, like asking you to write a creative or speculative essay about aliens landing or the end of the world, and you'll see that when you look at the topic list. And we do need to talk about the sample essay as well, so hopefully you read that before going into the video. If you haven't, now would be a good time to pause this video and go ahead and read that essay. You actually started reading this essay the week prior, because I showed you 2 of these paragraphs and they were out of order, and I had you arrange them in the correct order. And so now I've given you the rest of the essay. So it looks at 3 reasons or causes behind Hurricane Katrina being so deadly. It looks at strength, structural failures, and the government response. So even though it is mostly about causes, it very much talks about effects as well. So each paragraph looks at one of these causes. Body paragraphs 3 and 4 are both about the government response and how they failed the people of New Orleans. The terms are bolded, and the causal chain, which is in the conclusion, is highlighted. So the instructions for essay 3 talk more about that. You do have to bold your terms when you use them. You do have to include a causal chain, and you can just highlight the causal chain if you want. I know using the whole term causal chain can be a little awkward, so if you just want to highlight the chain, that's fine. So as the essay discusses, the immediate effects of Katrina's strong winds were destroyed buildings and loss of electricity. The winds were so strong that they did this immediately. That was an effect we saw right away. The main cause of the high death toll, according to this writer, was the levee failures, which broke and then flooded the city. And this person argues that so many people wouldn't have died without these structures failing. And they also look at the low-lying geography of New Orleans as a contributory cause of the scale of this disaster, because it exacerbated the flooding or made it worse. Was the geography the main cause of all these deaths? No, it contributed though. And so using the word contributory, contributed, contributory cause, bold it, that will count as one of your terms that you're using. And they also point out that a remote cause of the high death toll was city officials neglecting to maintain the infrastructure. And I thought it was really neat that they were able to identify this as a remote cause. And they put this is the causal chain they put in there, is years and years before this, the city, for whatever reason, decides not to build up these levees, not to maintain them. And then eventually that is going to cause them to fail when Katrina hits. And it's going to cause so many people to lose their lives. So that ended up being a remote cause for this very high death toll from Katrina, which was so long ago now. So that is all I have for you. Hopefully it prepares you to write your essay. Look through all of the materials next and then decide what you're going to write on. As always, you can write on something else as long as you email me and have me approve it. Any other questions, you can reach out and I'll be happy to assist. Happy drafting!